You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Good morning and welcome to the Be Better Off Show. Really excited today. We've got the co-owner, co-director of the Australian Reptile Park, Tim Faulkner, and he's also a director of the NGO Aussie Arc. I'm really very excited about what we're going to cover today because I'm interested in this area. A very good mate of mine and one of our directors speaks so highly of Tim, and I really think that you guys as listeners will benefit and enjoy what Tim has to share. Now on the Be Better Off Show, we try to make content that helps people be healthier, wealthier and wiser. This fits into the wiser category for sure, and I'm just particularly excited to welcome you this morning, Tim.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
Now mate, I want to ask you your story. Where did you grow up? What did you study? And how did you land in a reptile park?
Yep. You sure you want to know the answers to that?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, I'm born and bred Western Sydney.
Yep.
So spent my first 25 years in Greystone. I had a really great upbringing, with a real solid family, but I was sheltered in the capacity that I went to Greystone's preschool, Greystone's primary school, Greystone's high school, Greystone's cricket and Greystone's soccer. And so my story goes that I left school at 9 months.
Yep.
And I liked work. I was a very reasonable student at school. I did my work placement at an organisation called Seven-Day Wildlife Park in Western Sydney.
Yeah, it's been around a long time.
Has. 4 months later, I was employed there and stayed there for 10 years. And, at that point, the things that attracted me were work ethic, camaraderie, a really good workplace that was very committed, worked very hard, but had a lot of fun. And it was with native wildlife, which was my, childhood ambition, hence why I did work placement there.
So how old were you when you decided that you were interested in native wildlife?
Well, you see, my nan had 16 siblings, and they were all scattered up throughout the Blue Mountains, and so I spent a bit of time up there. And my dad's family were all out west, out around Walgett and, central West New South Wales. And they were all actually Murray Cotton. That was their profession. And that might sound odd to go from that to conservation, but the reality is that with a family like that, you get a toe into the natural world. And so my family holidays were spent between, down on the Murrumbidgee or up at Southwest Rocks on the North Coast. And my dad was always into catching lizards and snakes and goannas, and my mum was into orchids and flowers and plants. And so there was realistically just enough exposure for me, and I'm a big believer nowadays that kids just need to spend a bit of time in the bush. But that was my childhood. And so, by the time I was 10, I was keeping lizards and snakes, and, my afternoons and weekends were spent pursuing wildlife. And at 14, first work placement, that's where I went. And that it turned out to be a lucky, decision for me.
So how do you, Tim, you come home from doing your work placement at Featherdale Wildlife Park and you say to your parents, I'm 14 years and 9 months now, Mum and Dad, I can leave school. I want to take a job essentially shoveling whatever they ask you to shovel as a nearly 15-year-old. What do your parents say? Were they aware of this great passion of yours and they were on board with letting you pursue it at a young age?
No. I had to catch a bus to Featherdale wearing my school uniform and switch into my work clothes, only for about 3 weeks. But, I preface in that my dad is a career draftsman, worked for some big conveyancing companies. My mum was a small business manager her entire life. Their view of success was to get a trade and stick at it. And so it was really threatening to Dad in particular because, the zoo industry itself, you don't need necessary qualifications. Your zoo training courses that you do, you don't get a trade certification. And so, in contrast, my brother, who's a year or two younger, he finished year 12 and went on to be an electrician and then an electrical engineer and, did the mould. But no, it was really threatening. And over the years, my dad was worried and he lined me up an apprenticeship in carpentry and an apprenticeship in auto electrician. And, I dabbled, but I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the atmosphere. I enjoyed the friends that I made, and I worked very hard for. But ultimately, that platform wasn't big enough for me for a range of reasons we'll probably go through. But Mum and Dad weren't happy about it. They were supportive because there were good people at Featherdale, and they had engagement with them, you know, and at least knew that I was in a safe environment with good work ethic, and so they at least had that, but they weren't impressed.
Yeah, right. So you get to Featherdale. How do you train to look after wildlife? Did they put you through in-house training, or was there some tape training, or what is the situation? How do you learn about these animals and how to look after them? Because there's not that, you know, this in 20 plus years ago, I know there was Featherdale in Sydney and obviously Taronga, but I think that would have been about it.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, I mentioned about the camaraderie and work ethic, and you really didn't train to look after animals.
Yeah.
You trained to work hard, to be effective, to be efficient, to be accountable, you know. And so whilst it might sound really odd if you don't train for animals, I mean, you learn the differences between what birds eat, but you also learn that between what type of fruit it is and when the fruit's delivered and how it has to be cared for and quality control and what size it is and what time you do it. And so it was more around routine. The part in reality is that, you know, caring for animals is a lot of, kind of as you said at the start, there's a lot of shovel and shit, so to speak. You know?
Yeah, literally. Yep.
There's a lot of landscaping, there's a lot of maintenance. So through that process, and I guess we're
looking after their environment and making sure that all
tourism, right? And tourism, because it's a profitable business.
Yeah.
So, but through that, and I guess this is what has separated me, you know, genuinely in the long run, is that my interest in animals was incredibly personal and never waned. And so what that meant was, sure, at the time I'm getting this ethic and efficiency and effectiveness and accountability and work very hard, it enabled me to further pursue my interest. So I learned everything there is to learn about native wildlife on the tools. And, you know, textbooks can teach you a particular amount, but they are irreplaceable to on-the-job knowledge about animals. And so I did engage, you know, between the age of 16 and 35, let's say, to keep fresh. I've done the zoological captive animals course 4 times. You know, I've done certificate 3 and 4. I've done a diploma. I've done 3 other diplomas in my late 20s and 30s, early 30s in commerce and business management and accounting, and because that's what I lacked really, was the business management aspect of things. So, you know, and between all of that is an incredible amount of speaking occasions or seminars or, you know, workshops or. So I have had to upskill with a level of tertiary education, but certainly not to a degree that I could have left what I've done to go and pursue university, let's say. And I don't have any regrets on that because my on-job experience has done very well for me.
So it's interesting and a great comment in that so much work, you know, we find in our profession, you put somebody straight from school into a university, they do accounting in our case, which is entirely different in terms of the experience of studying accounting in a university and getting drunk at lunchtime is a lot different to sitting in an office doing accounting for a client and working with a team and other colleagues, some of whom are 40 years older than you if you're 21 or 2. The deep wisdom and commercial experience that people have in dealing, you know, the animals in our business, Tim, are the clients.
Yeah.
Right? Like, as you know, in approaching the animals you're looking after, is that they're all different. They might be the same species, but, you know, some of them react very differently to certain approaches than others. We've got clients, you know, of all ages, backgrounds, ethnicities, cultures, religious and personal beliefs, and they all need to be worked with in their own personal way, and you can't learn that sitting in a classroom in a university, and that is a huge part of the job. So they come, you know, for young people, they come out of university, they come into the workplace, and the culture shock is absolutely profound. Yeah. And I guess I give you that background to say, well, hey, you know, in your field, would the university study that people, you know, are inclined to do, who want to know more about the animals that they want to look after, is it better combined with practical, you know, training with you guys and an environment where you can get close to the animals?
Absolutely. And I go back again to, if you want to pursue this field, you better spend a little bit of time in the bush as a kid and have a basic understanding of what a plant and animal is. And, you know, I guess too, with my background, I just say the same, that, you know, I almost feel the need to be apologetic that I I left school so early. It's not what I want for my kids. But you know, I was invited to speak at my school many years later at my high school, and when they asked me what year did I finish, and I said it, they said that can't be right. And they said,
what was it, year 9? End of year 9 or?
End of year 10.
Yeah, end of year 10.
Yep.
But let me pick you up on that, Tim. When you now say, well, you left at the end of year 10, but you'd found your great passion.
Yep.
If your kids came to you and they'd found their great passion, one of the first interviews I did in my first book 27 years ago or 25 years ago was Ken Doan, a great Australian artist. Went to his parents at 14 and said, I don't want to go to school anymore because I want to be an artist. I want to go to the Australian Art School, I think it was called. And they had the courage as parents to allow him to enroll, which I always found. We've got kids now, and you know, if you can help your child find their great passion, that's a pretty special thing, because you meet a lot of people who've never found it.
Well, it's interesting.
But scary.
Yes, but I've got 2 young boys, 8 and 10, and you know, all they want to do is be dad. And that might change. You know, I don't try and coach them out of that, but I'm aware that I am a bit of an enigma in that. You know, I've probably seen 1,000 people walk through the same footsteps as me, and most have not enjoyed the same level of success, and it's a very niche market. So my worry to my kids is that they want to be dad, and you know, when they come in here in cold and weekends and whatnot, I make them work because I'm worried that they think we just pet animals. But one of the discussions I had with them very recently, my eldest in particular, and that was that I had to dangle a carrot because he thinks he's just going to work at the reptile park. And again, I realise this may be subject to change, right? And that's okay. Whatever he wants. But at the moment, that's what he wants. So I had to give him a bit of drive. And, you know, I have no interest in a messy family succession plan, handing down reptile park and hanging on for too long. And that's what he wants to pursue. Great. And so essentially, I had a long chat with my wife, and I said, how are we going to address this? And so where we ended up at was, I had a really nice chat with my eldest. My youngest is too young, but I said to him, you know, Phil, I'm really happy at a point when I'm 45, 50, to take a back seat. I will have been a frontline manager director then for 20 years, and that, you know, gives you great hairs. And so at that point, I'd really like to focus on a more conservation-orientated angle and love to be a part of the park in any capacity. I'm not giving up dividends. However, I said, mate, when you're at the age of 20, 22, 23, it's yours. But what you owe me by that point is a university degree in something like commerce or business. And I need them to get those skills to be able then to fail at their own endeavours. And I really sat well with that. It's so different. But, I mean, you're right. At 14, if that's all they want to do, great. But, you know, I've had such a lucky circumstance of wonderful mentors that have just been, you know, I've had like 5 mentors that my life.
But do you think that, but Tim, you know, in challenging you on that, having, you know, interviewed many, many people like yourself that have been incredibly effective in a diverse range of activities, they often say to me, oh, look, but I've been lucky. And there's a number of studies that show that highly successful people attribute luck much more often than moderately successful people, which is interesting. Yeah. But I do think that there's a level of humility in that, you know, to a degree you do make your own luck, in that, you know, you've had great mentors because you've been a great mentoree. You have great friends often when you're a great friend. You do, you know, if you turn up at 6 a.m. every day to your workplace, you tend to, you know, and you work a 12-hour day or more, or 14-hour day. I was listening recently to a podcast with Mike Bloomberg, and at his first job, he wasn't too bright, and he got his first shitty job, but he turned up at 6:30 every day, and the only other person in the office at that time was the boss.
The boss.
So he ended up being mentored by the boss, and the boss was an incredibly accomplished person, and he attributed that more than anything to his long-term success, because that boss recommended him after 5 years to someone else, and that really set him on his trajectory. So, you know, with your kids, if you know, I'm saying to my kids, well, if you're prepared to work as hard as anyone else and aim to be the best in the world at what you do, you'll probably do okay. They're sort of high standards rather than tickets of a degree or anything. But I take it like, you know, pushing your kids. I've had other clients say, well, you know, I want to open another reptile park in Brisbane, son. So if you can build me the business plan to do that, you know, then we can talk. And if they're really keen, they'll put in the effort to try and
Yeah. Well, I'm completely between that because I'd love nothing more than for them to, take ownership in their stride. But boy, I've seen some messy family succession plans with business.
Totally. Me too.
yeah, I bet. And again, through the Weigels here and Don and Robin and, moving to the Reptile Park in my early 20s, just the most wonderful place with broad-scale opportunities, inclusive of mentoring opportunities. And, that story you tell about the young fella and his boss is quite precisely and probably attributed to 70% of my success, and that's John Weigel. Life, professional, you name it. And
so when did you start working with John?
Well, John was a superhero to all that like Reptile, whatever age you were, And I came to the Reptile Park in I think I was 16 years ago, 23 odd years old, something like that. And I came here as a head keeper, the department supervisor of a particular section, mammals and birds. And, the snapshot from there is that a few years later, I moved up to operations manager, and a few years later to general manager, and then a business succession plan with John and Robin that was buy into the business with a stakeholder over a 10-year transition, essentially take the majority share of business, and that's in place now. But 23, and it was a really, really different place to work. It took a long time adjusting because Senator was very, very, very hard, like I say, really strong camaraderie. But, if you were going to turn up 5 minutes late, don't poke your head through the door for a week. It was hard. And I never was late, by the way. So I was the early one. But the Reptile Park, if Senator, let's say, was orientated like that, John Weigel, and I don't mean it by any stretch, John's been, he holds the men's over 35 pole vault record in Australia. He's a professional photographer, a professional venomologist. He's an explorer, adventurer, a taxonomist, a business owner, a wildlife tourism facilitator, a conservationist. When he gets into these things, and John's this kid that took off from the US. His dad's a urologist, his mum's a neurosurgeon, and he's this kid that said at 18 years old, I'm going to Australia to work at the Australian Reptile Park. But you know what? And I think from John's perspective...
There's another one, right? At 18, knew what he wanted to do.
Yeah, same, and did. And, and so that's been incredibly rewarding. But the park itself, and, I know I'm sitting in my office here, so it's somewhat biased, but you've got to see you come here, and there's 50-odd full-time staff. And that's a little up from 15 years ago, but it's big enough that it's a genuine business, but it's small enough that it has a real heart and a soul, and that's lovely. How
many animals?
A couple of thousand, a 250,000 to 300,000 visitors annually. And, we still now facilitate a really profound volunteer program. We recruit from it, so there are certainly successes. There's about between 60 and 100 volunteers that started at Reptile Park, employed in Australia at any one time. It's a really very desirable and recognised throughout industry. But you've got this volunteer program. I never worked with volunteers. I was managed hard. And so that transition to that, but you've got, we've got a whole venom precinct, and that might sound like a tourism gimmick, and it's not. We provide and facilitate venom for the production of anti-venom. We've done it since the 1950s. We save 300 lives a year, 20,000 lives in total, but that's a whole department. We do the same with funnel-web spiders. We have the tourism, we have the retail, we have staffing, and we have what is now one of New South Wales and Australia's upcoming native wildlife conservation facilities.
Now, talk to us about that, Tim, because I think this Aussie Arc is a very interesting initiative. When did it start? Who sort of conceived the idea? And what's the vision?
Well, again, John and Robin have always been very pragmatic. And, if we just take a snapshot without too much doom and gloom, but Australia has one of the worst extinction rates on Earth. We are one of the fastest countries losing biodiversity, which biodiversity is the number of species in any one location, so to speak. And we have the worst mammal extinction rate on Earth. There are as many small mammals gone extinct in Australia as the rest of the world put together in the last couple of 100 years.
And why is that?
Yeah, good question.
Australians don't strike me as anti the environment in any way.
We love the bush.
You know, I love the bush, pretty well educated and relatively, by global standards, small population.
That's right.
Low population density. So it doesn't immediately make sense that our record on
and we've got lots of bush, right? I mean, drive out of Sydney.
Bush, yeah.
North or south, wherever you go, you've got the Blue Mountains.
Yeah, 5 minutes. 5 minutes you're out of the city, you know, compared to global scenarios.
That bush is certainly for small mammals, and it's an ecological ghost town. It looks pretty rough. So, if you go up to northern Australia, New Guinea, West Papua, Kimberley, pick up a rock and throw it across the pond to Indonesia, Borneo, Philippines. When that rock hits the ground, you get great apes, primates, dogs, cats, bears, rodents, placental mammals like humans. Placental mammals. Placental mammals have big brains. And if you think about where that rock hit, you've then got connectedness from South America all the way through the continent over to South Africa. And so the evolutionary processes there between the cats and the dogs and the rats and the mice and the foxes, you've always had overlap, and evolutionary processes are driven for intelligence, you know, as well as other things. But intelligence, come on our side, we don't have placental mammals. No cat, no dog, no bear, no fox.
It's interesting, isn't it? Why is that? Is that just...
Because Australia has been separated from the rest of the world from all of history.
Yeah.
All of history. So we've got monotremes, you know, platypus echidna that lay an egg, incubate it, the egg hatches, it then suckles from a... You've got marsupials, kangaroos that climbing. We've got more species of reptile than any other continent on Earth. We have more parrots than any. So we were separated. Now, what happened in Australia, and you can instantly go to, oh, I get it, our animals are dumb. They do lack the intelligence of placental mammals. Now, for example, a fox's skull is half the size of a devil, Tasmanian devils.
Yeah.
Its brain is 3 times bigger. So, in that context, essentially, I like to think that Australian wildlife and our ecosystems evolved in a somewhat idealistic paradise that was isolated, you know, one big island separated for all of history. And the evolutionary processes drove for uniqueness and adaptation to a harsh environment. And so uniqueness didn't mean that you needed a big brain. You needed the best camouflage or a weird pouch and so what that means is, when Europeans came to Australia and foxes were released for hunting, for sport, cats as pets, when these placental predators came, they are no match. Our natives cannot stand. When a bandicoot takes off from a predator, it runs 3 meters and stops. Well, this predator is a Tasmanian devil. And you can picture the devil like Yogi Bear saying, "Where did he go, George?" And then the devil runs a bit and the bandicoot runs further. And look at a devil. It's a 44-gallon drum with legs. You know, It's not cheetah. Bring in the fox and cat. So the fox and cat are responsible.
Fox and cat,
90% of our attention.
And how and when and why were foxes introduced into Australia? Were they brought in by Europeans?
They were brought in for sport by early settlers, so they could continue the good old fox hunt.
And could you hunt them out if you wanted to?
No, Australia is a very big place. You know, They are so cunning, they are so witty. Same as cats. I mean, you know, and needless to say, we have all the problems of the rest of the world.
When did the cats come in?
Same time, late 1700s, right away.
And what do we bring those in for?
Pets.
Just pets.
And then you've got rabbits, hares, rats, mice, donkeys, pigs, goats, horses, you know, buffalo. And that's before we even get down to your, lesser prominent invasive species like weeds. You know, we all know blackberry and lantana. The profound change in the number of, or the biodiversity in Australia is really not so much the impact of the population here in terms of the way it lives and congregates in major cities, but more so the introduction of plant and animal species that have just basically eaten out or destroyed. Correct. If you think about Australia, you think of the Kimberley or the Pilbara or the Red Centre, and you know, it's very fair to say that they are very remote. They are very rugged. Yeah. And when we look at it, we think that it's intact, but it's not. Those areas are invaded by ferals. It's relatively intact because it's not being mined or farmed to the degree that it could.
but it's still not. And that's so, Tim, that's so interesting, because I think the average Australian is an intelligent person that's interested in the environment, and certainly wouldn't, wake up every day trying to just destroy biodiversity. But I've never heard that history lesson, which I think is so interesting. And then you wonder what the government efforts can be to combat it, whether you could really...
It's really hard because, and we have the other problems, right, of fungal diseases, climate change, pollution, urban sprawl, habitat destruction, agriculture. They're all very real too. But again, 92% of extinctions are from the fox and cat. In the big context, the thing is this as well, and this is where, Australians are naive to it. I mean that with the utmost respect. Yeah. And a lot of that is it's not our fault, because if I talk to you about a bandicoot, the only thing you'll think cool about it is its name. It's small and it looks like a rat, but it's a marsupial, right? But how do you sell a bandicoot for conservation next to a giant panda or orangutan or a whale or a giraffe?
Or even just a koala or a...
Koala, it's tough, and I see so many campaigns targeted in Australia about exotic animals when we've got all our own problems. And, there's no one that appreciates great apes and giraffes and rhinos more than me, don't get me wrong. Yeah. But, there's 120,000 orangutans in the wild. There's 800,000 humpback whales. There's like 500,000 elephants. And we've got less than 1,000 numbats, night parrots, orange-bellied parrots, gilberts, potoroos. I could keep going and going and going. And most of those things, no one's even heard of.
Yeah, totally. That
so your question, which was,
amount of sense.
How did we get into conservation, was that, the Weigels, again, really outcome-focused people. And from that, outcome focus means there needs to be outcomes, there's accountability to it. And, the old zoo model was a curatorial collection of, let's get 2 of every rare species on Earth, and call it a breeding program. But those concrete jungles are gone long ago. And so when the Tasmanian devil was struck down with the disease, essentially in 1996, it's a facial cancer. And within the following 10 years, annihilated about 75% of the population. And noting that Tassie is also separated from Australia. So if they had cats, the fox never made it to Tasmania. Of all Australian states and territories, Tasmania has the lowest extinction rate.
And so why was what caused the facial cancer, and was there anything they could do about it?
Yeah, so probably that devils had it really good. Right, we've gone down there as Europeans, opened the country up. There's more pasture, there's more herbivores, there's more food for devils. So their population boomed up maybe around 150,000. Because of that, you can get some inbreeding. You can, lightning struck, and
but not necessarily a human introduced fungus or infection or anything, just naturally occurring in the population.
Yeah, island species, very diminished gene pool. So the cancer is a facial cancer. It's like one of only 3 of its kind known to science, and the others are in canines and foxes or something like that. And so the devils get these gross lesions and lumps on their face, and it's transmissible because when they bite another devil or another devil bites them and it gets into a nick or a cut or a scratch, essentially it's a devil cell, and it's not that it intentionally hides itself, but the new host doesn't mount an immune response. They don't recognize it. So it essentially takes hold and kills them within 3 to 6 months. So we went and we loved that. I'll tell you why we love the devils, because it wasn't a fox, it wasn't a cat, it wasn't habitat loss. It was a disease. It's like a wildfire, let's say. If we could hold out long enough to let the disease consume its fuel and burn out, we could put devils back into the landscape. So we started with devils at the Reptile Park. 5 years later,
how many did you grab?
Yeah, so that 20 came to us in 2006.
And were you able to screen them for this?
Absolutely, a year-long project. Yep.
Jeez,
and so a few came to mainland, but 5 years later, we got about 50. It's very costly, very ineffective. You've got devils in singular pens. They lose their wild behavioural traits. And so one day I'm talking with John Weigel and saying, mate, this is, we're meant to have like 1,000 or 1,500 devils. The zoo industry's got 150 and we're full. And they're really resource intensive. And John said, what's the problem? I said, well, if you put 2 in an enclosure, small enclosure, they won't breed. And he says, well, somewhere between the size of that enclosure and Tasmania, they will.
Yeah. So smart.
Right? And he went in search of land. And so we found...
Where did you get the land?
Barrington Tops. We've got it now about 3,000 hectares. We actually just...
fence?
Yeah, good question. Because that's the thing, right? You get this land, and what do? Because you've got fox and cat. And so...
Got to build a wall.
Yeah, we're in the business at the present time of... And, moving forward very, very briefly...
I'm just having visions, Tim, of like Tasmanian Devils escaping Barrington Tops.
Well, let's hope they do. They'd be wonderful for mainland ecology. They were here 3,000 years ago. The dingo eradicated them because
do they eat the local cat and dog, or what are they?
Yeah. So it is... What's noted in Tasmania is that with the decline of the devil because of the disease, cat numbers have radically increased. So you can retrospectively see the devils controlled cats, and they do it through two ways. They eat their kittens, and second of all, where you have a devil, a cat avoids that area, and they can benefit.
Yeah.
So our main focus is conservation fencing. It's $150 a metre. That's all inclusive.
So this is exactly what I was thinking, is that you need high fencing that's deep.
600 millimetres underground.
Yeah.
2.1 metres high.
Yeah.
Umbrella over the top so that animals can't climb up.
Jump.
And an apron at the bottom that goes 900 millimetre each side.
So what are the maths, Tim, on 3,000 acres of...
Hectares? Yep.
3,000 hectares of fencing.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. Last year I fenced in a 500 hectare sanctuary. That's 1,000 football fields. It's 10 kilometres neat around it. That's 1.5 million. Lasts for about 40, 50 years. And at the moment, this is a model of going from species recovery to habitat recovery. And we really build up those species numbers.
Did you put the devils in that 500 hectares?
Correct. Devils, quolls, bandicoots, potoroos, rock wallabies, palmer wallabies, all of that.
Is that all the Barrington Tops?
Correct.
So you think for $10 million, you can probably fence 3,000 hectares.
Oh, no, cheaper than that. We could do, and again, it depends on the efficiency of your block.
Yeah, of the blocks.
But, $10 million, you get a lot of change. And I mean, I'm looking now at acquiring between 10 and 50,000 hectares, but can't fence that. So in comes potentially a natural control solution like the Tasmanian Devil that can control fox and cat numbers with other measures for controlling fire and weed and ferals.
Yeah, so you can go into that 3,000 hectares, you can weed it, get rid of the foxes, get rid of the cats, fence it, and then repopulate it so that, to your name, Aussie Arc, it's kind of like Noah's Ark. You throw all the good stuff in there.
Correct.
And then what's the plan from there?
So
re-release or?
Correct. And so I just mentioned something very quickly for your listeners and watchers because, I regularly have the conundrum, especially with internationals, because the rest of the world doesn't have this invasive problem like we do.
So we don't have like an apex predator in that space to control
that's right.
the cats and all.
If you're in Texas and you can put aside 3,000 hectares, you don't need to fence it. Just preserve it and the natives will thrive, So something I just want to mention is that as soon as I say a fence, people get a connotation of captivity. But I ask you in that case to consider Lord Howe Island.
Yeah.
You don't see a fence around it. The ocean does the same thing. It's a barrier. It stops disease, ferals. I ask you to consider the Murray River. Yeah. It's a virtual fence. It's a barrier. I ask you to consider a national park that is surrounded by agriculture. Yeah. It's a virtual fence.
But I think most people are okay with the concept of build an arc, create an environment where you can strengthen up your numbers.
Yeah.
What happens then in that if you can breed 1,500 devils, do you drop them back into Tasmania?
Yeah. Well, this is the problem.
Or do you have to hunt out the ones with the cancer?
No. Well, you can't release. Aside from ecological function of devils, we are still very committed to the insurance population. And what that is that not only we have an ecological function, but we have a greater genetic diversity, meaning devils were selected from Tassie, from all over. We have a greater genetic diversity at the Arc than any one location in Tasmania. So we still facilitate that insurance population role away from the disease landscape. But to your question of what happens when you breed up, so we go from species recovery projects with 20 or 50 animals. We go to habitat recovery sanctuary management, where we've now got hundreds or thousands of animals. And that's dependent on home range size. Like a bandicoot has half a hectare, a quoll has, a devil has. And so on that note, our model is that we build 4 or 5 of these sanctuaries.
Yeah.
Really ramp up. And ideally, they're situated like we are, which is that you have a state forest, a state conservation reserve, and a national park on the backside. And you bleed out. But what we can't do, but what we can't do is just feed the fox and cat.
Yeah, totally.
So there's 2 models. Either we have to breed to a point and stop breeding and, pause it to let, we don't want, if you have unregulated breeding in a sanctuary, obviously you can have 1,000 bandicoots all starving to death slowly. And you've got to avoid that. So the concept is, but we get bigger parcels of land, 10,000 hectares, non-fenced, but managed for feral, fire and weed. And with the right reintroductions and a heck of a lot of work and time put into it, we're able to start and re-establish and rewild some of the threatened, locally extinct species.
So what is just on the devils, because you've got me intrigued here, what is ultimately the solution? Do you go in and remove devils that are infected with cancer and effectively euthanize that population, or take them out? Can you screen how many are left?
Yep, so there's somewhere between 10 and 20,000 left. The massive decline happened between sort of 1996 and 2010. It's a density-related disease, meaning the denser the population, the more faster it spreads. So
it's almost self-regulating to a degree.
Well, yeah, maybe. The problems are there are other stochastic effects. Like, let's say you had 120 devils in an area, and 80% of them are gone. You're left with a very small handful, and that's not even the effective population, meaning of the 20 or 30 that are left, some are too old to breed, some are too young.
Yeah.
You get inbreeding very quick, but you think that if a car kills 2 females, your numbers are so there are stochastic effects that are happening, and so it's really uncertain. And you've got it managed by a state government, and so that has its limitations to how legislation comes out, and flexibility and adaptability. And so at this point in time, there have been significant decline in numbers. The disease is still present in the landscape. Stochastic effects are coming in, like dog attack, car strike, habitat loss, etc., inbreeding, that may result in the devil's extinction in Tasmania more than not the disease, even though the disease did the main job. But it's a little unknown at this point in time.
So like active intervention of trying to get the disease out, pair up the population.
It's too hard. They tried that in a controlled area on the Tasman Peninsula. Couldn't do it in a small area. Tried doing it in Tassie. Beyond that, there has been, and I want to preface with this, that I'm a big advocate of it if it was successful, but there's been somewhere in the vicinity of about 50 million spent on devil vaccination research.
Yeah.
Do you know what I could have done with 50 million?
Yeah.
And there's no solution.
Come up with a COVID vaccine.
And there's no solution. So the textbooks have got a lot better. We've learned a lot. There are some trials of vaccinated devils, but the vaccination wears off. It's not passed on to offspring. And, I can only see its role being that you vaccinate a devil for a captive one, we're going to release, but its offspring it's really tough, right? So I don't know what the future holds for the devil. What I do know is that they won't go extinct because we'll have a robust population.
Because there's attention on it.
Yeah, but what they're going to do in Tassie is yet to be seen. The next, and what's terrible about this and why we love the devil so much as well is that there's much more at stake than the devil. By it controlling cats in Tasmania, a lot of the smaller mammals that cats prey on were still abundant in Tassie. So you risk collapse of trophic scales and species because of the role that the devil played. And that's one of the saddest parts, and that's one of the reasons we believe in the devil so much, because there is more at stake than the devil.
Yeah, and look, in fairness, it's an animal that I think has broad public resonance.
Yeah.
And so it's quite a marketable endeavour, and if that can allow you to develop an approach that can then be used on other species, then then that in and of itself is a good thing. The fact that they've spent $50 million trying to come up with a vaccine, although we might think there's better uses for the money, at least we can see an example of a government's commitment to conservation at that level, which is in and of itself quite interesting. So the future of Aussie Arc, it's funded by donations. How do you fund this type of endeavour? Is it, obviously people aren't going to the place to pay an entrance fee.
Correct.
When people come to the park, the Reptile Park, do you encourage them on top of their ticket price to make a donation, or
not really? We're very shy. When people come to the park and pay a ticket, that's their entry to have fun. So we really don't hit with that too hard. We utilise the Reptile Park very heavily. Like, for example, 30% of my time spent on the Arc. I've never been paid $1, right?
Yeah.
So that's the same as
they've got some cross-sharing of resource.
We've got cross-sharing of resources to get. Because Aussie Arc was originally Devil Arc before we expanded to many other species.
Yep.
John and Robin put a fair whack of their life savings in to get it up and established in the early days, and that's what it takes, pioneers that no guts, no glory, and dive head on in. But now, because of our somewhat narrow focus in New South Wales, our deliverables that have really come to fruition, we have lots of partners that are long-term partners, international partners like Global Wildlife Conservation, local partners like Wires and Australian Geographic and Glencore, who's mining industry, but up in the Hunter Valley, and support their local region in that capacity. So, we have wonderful public-private partnership with government that's more related around the thinking of species projects, the alleviation of legislation and streamlining of processes to let us get the job done. And it's not a financial relationship, and that's okay. But realistically, we have a core group of people that give regular donations that enable us to facilitate operations and get the tangible job done. And we have big partners and investors that really contribute to fencing sanctuaries and things like that.
So how did you buy the 3,000 hectares?
Yep. Well, some of it is leased, long-term lease, $1 a year.
From the government?
Oh, no, from private. In actual fact, the first blocks that we're on were from the Packer family, Gretel and Rob, in particular. And they've got a farm up there, so we have some heavily forested area. I should preface with that we wouldn't exist without the Packers' donation of land, but that doesn't extend to a financial relationship.
Yeah, so they essentially owned a bunch of random land and said you could.
Correct. Here you go. Here's some land. And so beyond that, only last week we signed on a property at Kurikaba, which is just over the back, another few hundred hectares. It was owned by Michael Kennedy, the founder of the Humane Society International. He put covenants over it 40 years ago. And because of that, it was dirt cheap. But because it's not worth anything to agriculture, so it's great for us. We just picked up another 2,000 hectares of heavily forested area that backs on the state forest, the national park, up near Casino, which is great because it brings in a little more biodiversity, has an altitudinal change above sea level. And that'll give us a mosaic of sort of 4 or 5 sanctuaries. Then we need the big job, the 10,000 hectares.
Yeah. And where is the ideal 10,000 hectares?
Well, what I'm optimistic about...
Like, is it climate related or water related or?
No. So what it's related to is wherever the bloody hell you can find 10,000 hectares of reasonably.
Yeah.
It's hard, right?
Yeah.
So what you've got is national park, World Heritage Area, state conservation reserve or state forest. Now, what I'm optimistic about is a public-private partnership within state forest.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because, the forestry is good for jobs, but it's really inefficient, almost to the degree that it's non-viable. And as time goes on, that'll be even more the case. I realise that government don't want to lose it off their balance sheet as an asset. That's fine. Lease it to us long-term. We can even compensate the state for that. So I'm really optimistic about that because there are really large tracts of state forest that we could, in public-private partnerships, do some real significant work in that regard. And because it's state forest under a different portfolio than environment and energy, it's easier to work in than World Heritage or National Park. So that's what I'm really optimistic about.
Yeah, it's very, very, very interesting. So for our listeners, I think there's some great lessons to, Tim, your passion, I think is and focus on something that you love, I think is, something I've so often shared with people. I think it's so important. And then the fact that you've worked so hard to make it a reality, I think is really, really interesting for people. If our listeners want to support the work you're doing, do they go to aussiearc.com.au or is it Australian Reptile Park, or how do they get involved to help?
Yeah, so look, the easiest thing by far is to visit aussiearc.org.au. There are a range of projects. The deliverables are very evident. I suggest to people, if you want to have a look at the deliverables, have a quick Google of Aussie Arc.
Yeah.
Have a look at what we've achieved over 10 years. Look at the news stories and cut the crap out of it. We are really outcome focused.
Yeah.
So much work goes into research, and it's important, but the very definition of it is to watch, learn, monitor, observe. There's no accountability and outcome. And so this type conservation where we have strong academic partnership, but it's not rocket science, right? You breed some species, you put them back where they need to be, you have the land protected to put them in, and it's a real outcome-based model. So we're very public, we're very easy to see. The other is that we do open at the Christmas time, and I encourage people to visit. It's very cheap. The main thing and reason why we do that is because after 8 years, we had so many supporters, and so many of them are just families. I'm not talking big. And it was time to let them see it. So it's not easy for us to facilitate tourism up there because of where it is, and we're very efficient in resources staff. And so at Christmas we open, maybe one other holiday, but I just encourage people.
For a day or two or for a week?
We open for the month.
Yeah, in December.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. So guys, go to aussiearc.org.au. In December, there's an opportunity to take the family up and have a look. I'm intrigued, and Tim, I've loved our chat because I think it's an area that we all assume we know something about, but as I always say, if you can meet an expert, you'll work out that you're not one. And so there it is. Mate, I want to congratulate you on the amazing work that you and your organisation are doing, not just in Aussie Arc, but in the Reptile Park, in bringing that opportunity to young people, because I know as a young kid I was taken up there, and I know all my kids have been up there with the schools and whatnot, and I just think it's a really great community service, apart from the fact that you're running things so professionally as a business as well, and then extending that out. I've really enjoyed catching up with you today. I'm going to come up and see you, which I think is just a great excuse to make the trip. I'm fascinated by these Devils and the work you're doing there. I just think it's one really high-profile example of what I do think is in most people's heart is a willingness to try and make a difference for the animals that we're trying to coexist with.
And Brett, needless to say, the Reptile Park is a client of yours, and we enjoy that very much. And the first opportunity you guys had to do the accountancy of Aussie Arc, it's pro bono, and that's just wonderful, mate. And we thank you very much for that, because funds are hard to raise, they don't grow on trees, and we enjoy our relationship with you. So win-win for all, and thank you.
No, it's a great story, Tim, and I know Scotty and his team up there on the Central Coast are doing a great job for you, and he was keen for me to chat with you as I was. And look, we're in business to make people better off, and I'm really, really great and glad to hear that we're doing that with you guys. So you have a great day, and to our listeners, I really commend the Australian Reptile Park, aussiearc.org.au to you. I hope you've enjoyed this chat as much as I have. Tim, on a Friday. Absolutely fantastic, mate. Thank you.
Thank you, mate. All the best.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.